This is fine. Good morning. My name is Dr. Justin Harmon, and I'd like to formally welcome you to my Introduction to Philosophy class in this very strange spring quarter we're all embarking upon. So I'm going to produce a series of these videos, one per week, primarily to the purpose of helping us walk through some of these very challenging readings. But today, I want to just talk about the tradition and practice of the discipline of philosophy and what it can do for us in a time of crisis or uncertainty. Um, I'll be delivering this course through the vehicle of science fiction, and philosophy and science fiction share a powerful affinity, and that they both work largely by freeing up the artificial rigidity of present actuality to disclose threatening or potentially liberatory possibilities that are concealed, but in any case, lurking beneath. Um, Philosophers think about what we take for granted when we think about anything else. And philosophy is about asking particular questions, open-ended questions. What kind of questions are philosophical? Some of the most enduring, impressing concerns that unite disparate peoples throughout history. Questions like, why am I here? Who am I? What does it mean to be human? What is the good life? Am I living that life? Is it possible to do so given current historical circumstances? What is true justice? Is it attainable? What is death? Is it possible to achieve a good death? What is the nature of freedom? Is it an illusion? And these questions, although quite diverse, what they have in common is that they are open-ended in the sense that there's no definitive, conclusive answer to any of them, but in any case, they demand to be asked, to be grappled with. And every one of them implicates the questioner, the thinker. And even if we don't have a particularly worked out answer or set of responses to these questions, a kind of alignment or orientation to them is manifested in the way we live our lives. So philosophy can open up some of those deep-seated and concealed intellectual commitments in terms of how we grasp conceptually the real and find our place within it. And we can unpack philosophy perhaps by attending to a few important quotations. But etymologically, what is philosophy? It means the love of wisdom, philaion Sophia. So Sophia is one word for wisdom or knowledge from the Greek, a particular sort. But philosophy is not wisdom, it's love of wisdom, where the object of desire or love is nothing that can be at any point completely possessed. It remains free as a kind of goad or impetus and an incitement towards further engagement, further thinking. Now, looking at Aristotle, one of the most influential thinkers in the Western intellectual tradition, Aristotle in book 1 of his Metaphysics says, through astonishment, humans began to philosophize, both now and in the beginning. Now, astonishment, sometimes translated as wonder, derives from the Greek word thaumazein. And with respect to astonishment and coming to face up to being in the grip of this kind of paralysis, not knowing where to turn, not knowing where to go, we desire to overcome it. But through philosophy, not by prematurely or artificially dissolving the question as a question, that is, setting it aside, which amounts to pretending that it never gripped us in the first place, that we were never arrested by it. But instead, by coming to terms with the astonishment, making oneself at home with the object of that perplexity, That is, uncovering the truth of the astonishing as astonishing and taking that seriously. Um, Aristotle's famous mentor, Plato, in one of his most important dialogues, and it's a dialogue that concerns the nature and possibility of knowledge, Plato's chief protagonist, Socrates, says, "For this is an experience characteristic of the philosopher, this astonishment or thalmazein. This is where philosophy begins and nowhere else." Now, I mentioned in connection to astonishment this idea of being not at home, and the philosopher desires to achieve a kind of being at home with the uncanny, with the strange. And this brings us to a quote from a 19th century German romantic poet, Novalis, who says, "Philosophy is really a homesickness, the desire to be at home everywhere." Well, under conditions of shelter in place, social distancing, presumably we're all at home, but it's a home that's no longer familiar to us. It's a home that has been rendered strange. And I don't know about you, and we can now move on from astonishment to another state of mind or mood, that of distraction, right? So when these self-isolation, shelter-in-place directives were first made, I don't know about you, but I had some grand ideas about how I would occupy my time, that I would get a lot of work or reading done. But in point of fact, I can't find myself staying with any particular task for more than 10 minutes. I am jumping from one thing to the next in a state of, of arrest, of paralysis in terms of what to do. And distraction, etymologically, it literally means being pulled in multiple directions at once, losing your footing, having no integral orientation. This kind of distractedness, then, is something that we shouldn't pretend is not there and artificially, prematurely set it aside in order to get our work done, but rather we can use it as a kind of field of illumination through which the world with which we are now confronted can show itself in its reality, which frees us for a new relationship with not necessarily only what is, but instead with what might be. And we find ourselves in a terrible condition of uncertainty right now. And so distractedness is connected to perhaps the experience of anxiety, which is also related to thalmazein or astonishment. We are anxious in the face of that which we don't understand. And we are largely anxious in the face of death as the possibility of the impossibility of being, or the possibility of the impossibility of sustained existing historical and material conditions. Things are changing. Things are going to change profoundly, and we don't know how. How do we navigate this shifting landscape? The 20th century German phenomenologist, philosopher, existentialist philosopher Martin Heidegger famously distinguishes between fear and anxiety. Fear is always, as an emotional or affective state, it's always fear of something. So if you're afraid of sharks, stay away from the water, and no pun intended, the fear loses its teeth. If you're afraid of cops and you find one in your rearview mirror following behind you, they suddenly take a right, your fear abates. The fearful object is gone. But anxiety is always precisely anxiety of nothing. It's a generalized fear, whereby everything that you encounter, every object that populates the world of your experience, shows up as anxious. So you go into a grocery store now, And even a carton of eggs, you pick it up. I mean, dealing with the infinitesimally small in the way of a virus now, the eggs could be contaminated. Um, so anxiety discloses no thing in particular. That is the possibility of profound nothingness that lies as a sort of abyssal ground beneath actuality itself and the conditions confronting us in the world. So we can understand moods as fields of illumination in which things come to presence and show themselves in some particular way. Now, we ought not understand them metaphorically as lenses through which we examine objects, because the idea of a lens presupposes the independent existence of the thing seen through the lens, whereas light, so building on this idea of moods or mental states as fields of illumination, light is co-constitutive of what gets disclosed. Without it, nothing can come to presence at all. And anxiety discloses that kind of dark ground that is constantly undergirding conditions of actuality. Um, Anxiety, distraction, astonishment, these all explore the radical precarity or instability, the contingency of the present, that things may no longer be in the way that they are, or that things may no longer be at all. Um, Anxiety, distraction, and astonishment then are all points of inauguration into the practice of philosophy itself. And this can lead to a kind of freedom. The early modern thinker, Montaigne, says, "He who has learned how to die has unlearned how to be a slave." And this resonates with the idea articulated long ago by Socrates that philosophy is a kind of training for death. So, through the philosophical confrontation of uncertainty in the mode of anxiety, we can free ourselves up for what is to come in the face of the real. Through a true philosophical engagement with that which is most disturbing, we can win a kind of freedom. And I want to use that as a starting point for how we will take up some of the important questions and problems in this course. So I hope to see you all in our first Zoom meeting tomorrow from 10:30 to 12:20, so every Tuesday.